Pay attention to this next part, because what just happened, if confirmed, doesn't just change the Middle East. It changes the global, legal, and geopolitical architecture that has governed state accountability, nuclear negotiations, and the laws of armed conflict for the last 4 decades. Israeli security sources are reporting that Ali Khamenei is dead, the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, gone. And here's what they're not telling you. This moment has legal, constitutional, and strategic consequences that no cable network is even beginning to explain. So let's do that right now. Let me give you the factual framework first, because that's where we have to start. Khamenei has been Iran's supreme leader since 1989. That is 35 years of consolidated, theocratic, and military power. He is not just a head of state. Under the Iranian constitution, and yes, Iran has one, the supreme leader holds final authority over the armed forces, the judiciary, nuclear policy, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. That last part matters enormously because the IRGC is not just a military branch. It is a designated foreign terrorist organization under U.S. law, designated by the Trump administration in 2019, 50 U.S.C. Section 1701, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and Executive Order 13224 on terrorist financing. The IRGC operates globally. It has cells in South America, West Africa, and yes, inside the United States. Khamenei was their commander. Now think about this for a second. When a designated terrorist organization loses its supreme commander, not to natural causes, not to succession, but reportedly to a targeted Israeli operation, what happens legally? What happens operationally? And what happens to every ongoing federal prosecution, every sanctions framework, and every nuclear agreement that was premised on him being the decision maker on the other side? This is bigger than one case. This is a rupture in the legal and strategic order. Here's the public perception. People are watching this as a military story, an intelligence story. Was it a strike? Was it an assassination? How did Israel pull this off? Those are legitimate questions. But from a prosecutor's perspective, from the perspective of someone who has spent their career understanding how power operates, how institutions respond to sudden vacuums, and how governments use legal architecture to justify or constrain what they do, the real story is something else entirely. The real story is what comes next, who controls it, and whether any legal framework can hold. Here's what they're not telling you. The death of Khamenei, if confirmed, triggers something lawyers call a principal agent collapse. The principal, the supreme authority whose decisions bind subordinates, is gone. And the agents, the IRGC commanders, the Quds Force, the proxy networks in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Gaza, they don't suddenly stop. They fragment. They compete. And in that competition, they become more dangerous, not less, because now they're acting without central constraint. Every federal prosecutor who has worked organized crime understands this dynamic intuitively. When you take down the boss, whether it's a cartel leader, a mob underboss, a terrorist financier, you don't get peace. You get a succession war. And succession wars generate violence, desperation, and unpredictability. We saw this after Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed in 2019. ISIS didn't disappear. it metastasized. The organizational structure fractured into regional franchises, each one competing to prove ideological legitimacy. Pay attention to this next part. Iran is not ISIS. Iran is a nation state with a nuclear program at approximately 60% uranium enrichment, one technical decision away from weapons-grade material. The IAEA has documented this. The International Atomic Energy Agency's February 2024 report explicitly flagged Iran's accelerated enrichment activity at Fordo and Natanz. The question that no one on television is asking tonight is this: who controls that program right now? Because if Khamenei is gone and the succession is contested and the IRGC is fragmenting, the command and control over nuclear material becomes, legally and strategically, one of the most dangerous variables on the planet. From a prosecutor's perspective, and I want you to really hear this, when we talk about nuclear command authority, we're not talking about politics. We're talking about existential, legal, and physical risk. We're talking about the Biological Weapons Convention, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, UN Security Council Resolution 2231, the legal framework governing the 2015 JCPOA. All of those frameworks assumed a functioning, centralized Iranian state authority. That assumption just became uncertain. Let me ground this in legal and historical precedent, because that's where the real picture comes into focus. The assassination or targeted killing, depending on which legal framework you apply, of a sitting head of state raises immediate questions under international law. Specifically, customary international humanitarian law and the UN Charter's Article 2.4, which prohibits the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. Now, Israel has never formally acknowledged a targeting operation while it's ongoing. That is a deliberate legal strategy. It's called strategic ambiguity, and it serves a specific legal purpose. It avoids triggering the formal international legal accountability mechanisms that would attach to an admitted state act of war against a sovereign government. Think about this for a second. The United States did something similar when we killed Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. General Soleimani was the commander of the Quds Force, the IRGC's external operations arm. The Trump administration justified that killing under the 2002 Authorization for Use of Military Force, the AUMF, and Article 2 Presidential Authority. Legal scholars debated that justification vigorously. Congress held hearings. The War Powers Resolution was invoked. But here's the critical distinction between Soleimani and Khamenei. Soleimani was a military commander. Khamenei was a head of state, a supreme political and religious leader. That distinction carries enormous weight under the Hague Regulations, the Geneva Conventions, and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The Rome Statute, Article 8, CLO, war crimes. Article 7, CLO, crimes against humanity. These are not abstract. These are the legal instruments by which the international community has tried to hold state power accountable. Now, Israel is not a party to the Rome Statute. The United States withdrew its signature under the Bush administration and has never rejoined. But that doesn't make the legal analysis irrelevant. It makes it more important because it tells you exactly how these governments have structured their legal exposure. Here's what they're not telling you. The International Court of Justice currently has active proceedings involving Israel of brought by South Africa under the Genocide Convention. Those proceedings don't directly address this event, but they exist within the same legal environment. Every major action Israel takes right now is being watched by ICJ judges who are already evaluating Israeli conduct under international law. This creates what lawyers call legal compounding risk. Each action doesn't exist in isolation. It feeds a broader evidentiary and legal record. And on the US side, this matters for domestic law too. The IRGC's designation as a foreign terrorist organization means that any US person who provides material support knowingly or unknowingly faces federal prosecution under 18 U.S.C. Section 2339B. That statute has been applied aggressively by DOJ. But it also means that U.S. intelligence agencies, U.S. personnel, and U.S. government actors need legal authorization, specific, documented, reviewed legal authorization before they engage in or support any operation targeting IRGC leadership. Did they have it here? We don't know yet, but pay attention to what happens in the next 72 hours in Washington. Whether administration officials are called to testify, whether the Gang of Eight, the senior congressional leaders who receive classified intelligence briefings, was notified, whether there is a war powers notification. That sequence will tell you more about what the U.S. role was than anything any official says publicly. Here's where this becomes a story about institutions and their survival. The rule of law, whether we're talking about domestic federal law or international legal frameworks, depends on one foundational premise: that powerful actors are constrained by rules, not just by power. When a supreme leader can be killed, when the most protected, most insulated head of a nation state can be removed by a foreign intelligence service, it sends a signal to every authoritarian government on the planet. And that signal is not just strategic, it is legal, it is constitutional. It speaks to the premise of sovereignty itself. Now, I am not mourning Khamenei. Let me be direct about that. This is a man who presided over the systematic suppression of his own people, who funded terrorism across 4 continents, who oversaw a nuclear program designed to threaten regional and global stability. The Iranian people who have lived under this regime know better than anyone what his rule meant. But from a rule of law perspective, the method matters as much as the result, because the method sets the precedent. And the precedent is this: targeted killing of heads of state outside declared armed conflict without publicly stated legal authority is becoming normalized. Think about what that means for international stability, for the legal frameworks we've built since Nuremberg, for the idea that there are rules, actual enforceable rules, governing how nations treat each other. This is bigger than one case. If we accept that legal architecture only applies to the weak, that powerful nations and their allies can act outside those frameworks and face no accountability, then we are not living in a rules-based international order. We are living in a power-based order with a legal veneer. And that should concern every American, regardless of party, regardless of how you feel about Iran. Because the same logic that executive power, unconstrained by law, acting lethally against designated enemies, without judicial review, without congressional oversight, without public legal justification, that logic does not stay neatly overseas. We have seen it migrate home before, and we are watching institutional guardrails weaken in real time. The question is not whether Khamenei deserved his fate. The question is who decides, under what authority, with what oversight, and what happens when no one is asking those questions anymore. Here's the sobering truth. We are at a moment, and I don't say this lightly, where multiple legal and institutional frameworks are under simultaneous stress. Domestically, the independence of the DOJ, the authority of federal courts, the functioning of congressional oversight, all under pressure. Internationally, the laws of armed conflict, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Framework, the ICJ, the UN Security Council mechanisms, all being tested. And events like this one don't happen in a vacuum. They happen within that stressed environment. They shape it. They accelerate it. The confirmation or non-confirmation of Khamenei's death will play out over days. Watch who speaks first. Watch what legal justifications are offered or deliberately withheld. Watch whether Congress is briefed. Watch what Iran's internal succession process looks like and how fast the IRGC moves to consolidate control. Every one of those data points is legally significant because what we are really watching is not just a geopolitical event. We are watching a test of whether legal accountability still functions when the most powerful actors in the world decide to act. The answer to that question will define the next decade. Stay informed. Watch the legal architecture as closely as you watch the headlines, because the headlines tell you what happened. The legal architecture tells you what it means and what comes next. More accountability, more truth, right here.